And then we're sat there, and my mum's opened up the inlay, goes, "What's all this G's and bitches and endo and all it?"
First of all, this sepia, this tint gives off this idea that you're very old. And I don't think you're that old.
I'm not old. It's just that some tea or coffee spill on the photo, honestly. Dropped a pill in my pint, but he didn't tell me. And I'm there in this wedding suit. And I'm like, turned around to him and said, I'm heating up here, man. I said, something's not right. And he's trying to keep a straight face, but he's giggling and laughing his ass off and that. And I turned, I went, "You bastard, you jump up and anything you can pick up, just fucking chuck at these gangsters that are running in." You had like five, you had, I think there was 5 or 6 women in the bar staff, 1 bouncer, and you had all these fucking hard nuts from Salford that were charging the door. And them just chucking bottles after bottle at them, and then the bouncers had like chairs trying to force them back out the door. Anyway, they shit themselves. So they what alcohol had done to his body, and I just couldn't get. And he was 40, and like he died not long after. But he came out and he told me like he was going to try all these different things, and then within 3 months he was dead, and I just can't get my head around it.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of One of Each. I'm your host for this evening, John Chin, and of course, from wherever you guys are tuning in from across the world, I hope you guys are doing well. Now, for those of you who have been following me here on YouTube and supporting my work, first of all, thank you very much. But for those of you who have been following me for days or for months or for years, and by the way, for years, if that's you, I love you for real. But for however long you've been supporting my work and watching my content, you will know that I am a Manchester United fan through thick and thin, through the darkest of days. I mean, whatever adjective you need to describe an avid supporter, when it comes to Manchester United, that's me. Manchester United will always have a special place in my heart, and it is going to be my club until the day I die. Yeah, it's that serious. Throughout the years of me supporting the club, I've done my part in trying to learn about the history, the tradition, the culture, the good times, the bad times, everything there is about Manchester United. I've tried to learn, and I've also stressed the importance of learning about the city of Manchester. And thanks to the club, throughout the years of me talking about Manchester United here on YouTube and on Twitter and all these social media platforms, I've been grateful and have been blessed to develop new friendships and forge new bonds and find these brotherhoods with these amazing people, not just in the city of Manchester, but in England as well as across the world. Manchester United have been so special and gracious to me because thanks to my support and love for Manchester United, I've been able to connect with all of these people around the world. And one of these people that I am going to introduce to you today is somebody that I truly respect and admire from the bottom of my heart, for real. And you guys know that I talked about this like this with Jay, but this man is truly what's the word I'm looking for? Multi-level, multifaceted. Some might call him an entertainer, but for me, I call him an artist. I think he is truly an artist in his purest form. He is a poet. He is a musician. He is a writer. He's a radio DJ. I mean, whatever you think you know about entertainment and art, this man, he knows. And he's somebody that like I said, truly respect for his ability to overcome the darkest of days in his life. And you'll obviously hear more about that in detail as you watch this video. So let me not waste any more time before I continue to butcher this introduction. This man is Mr. David Scott, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. Thank you very much.
I'm gutted that I've missed you when you come over and seen some of the Stretford Paddock boys in the past, but you're right, Manchester is a really sort of humble city, very welcoming as well. Time was though, John, like if anyone supported Manchester United from outside of Manchester, they used to be quite... they didn't know how to accept people from outside the city, but I'm all for that. I love that we've got such a global fan base, and you very much wear your pride of being a United fan on your sleeve,
Yeah, no, for sure. I spoke to a couple of the locals there when I actually went to watch Manchester United at Old Trafford. When they spoke to me, they only told me of good things about the club, sort of introducing, I guess, from your perspective, foreigners and players from outside of England and all that, because it brought energy, it brought culture, and it brought tourism to
Yeah.
Manchester. Did you notice a lot of that when you were growing up? In terms of like, what am I looking for? In terms of like international, in terms of outsiders.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the time when I was really going to Old Trafford on my own as a fan, of because I used to go with my dad quite a lot, was around the mid to late 90s. And before that, Manchester United, and I think football in itself was very much sort of a cult sport. Do you know what I mean? It didn't seem like it had this sort of global fan base. So everyone that you saw, everyone you went to in the stands with, spoke with the same accent, all had the sort of same sense of humour. Even the players were very similar in their personalities. Like nowadays, you get quite a different mixed bag in terms of who plays for the club. But back then, it was very much, it was a working class sport. And now I think when United got really successful to obviously around the treble and the Premier League took off with Sky Sports and the money sort of got infiltrated in, I do feel like we've lost something in terms of the connection between the fan base and the players. But the benefit of that is that the football's a hell of a lot better. We can always look back with rose-tinted glasses, and many United fans will say George Best was the greatest player ever, but I don't think that he'd be able to compete with his lifestyle as he would, in today's modern game.
Right. I mean, you and I can sit here and talk about Manchester United all day today. But today, today I brought you on here because I want to talk to you a little bit about your life. I mentioned in the beginning that you were a rock star, but hearing you and Jay speak about your lives and your the earlier days of you guys growing up, everything just is to me very interesting, and I feel like there's lots to unpack here. So I have selected 3 photos. You are the first guest to have sent me more than 3, and it was very difficult for me to pick, but we're going to get straight into it, and hopefully we'll have a good one.
Okay.
For those of you who can't really tell, there's a massive crowd going crazy, and Dave just pointing the camera. Can you talk to me? Walk me through this and what's going on here.
So this was me and the band, it was our last real tour. This will have been February 2020. So it's like 2 weeks before the pandemic really kicked off in England, and we all had to go on lockdown. And it was the last night of our last tour, and we'd never played Cornwall before. So we went down there unaware of what it was going to be like in the venue, and we'd sold out. And I couldn't believe that we never played. We didn't know if we had any sort of fan base. Went down there, the whole place was absolutely booming, and just by bouncing from the beginning of the concert until the very end. And that part there, I jumped over to do a crowd. Like I thought I was going to crowd surf, but I didn't. There was too big a gap. So I had to climb over. Then everyone in the crowd sort of knew the words. And this is what I always love about the internet, is that you don't know who you're going to speak to, regardless, if it's like social media or through like an art form. And that I had such a massive welcome and response from so many people to a place in England that I'd never ever been to. And it was, like I said, it was the last night that we'd performed live before the pandemic, and the band sort of gone its separate ways. We're still doing certain little things, but that will always remain the sort of greatest gig that I've ever done, really. And I mean, everything that picture sort of says there was how I felt afterwards. I was so gutted, usually because I'm quite energetic on stage. It gets to about the hour and a half mark in, I'm quite happy to get off, just have a little rest. It's like, but it was just, honestly, the energy was just like, and as a performer, you need that and you thrive off it, so it was really hard to get off the stage, and then we partied on the way back afterwards and stuff. But yeah, it was that was like live in Truro.
I see. So as a performer, I've never been in this kind of scale of performing. I think at most I performed to was in front of my parents, practicing for some like church singing thing when I was like 15 or something like that. But as a performer, walk me through that energy, like the intensity of it all, the adrenaline. Like, how do you like cope with that?
Difficult, I think. I will not have it that anybody doesn't go onto stage and they're nervous, before they go. And if they do, then I don't think that they actually care about what they're going to do, because your job first and foremost is to go out there and entertain people. So for me, I still remain nervous to this day whenever I go on stage, and regardless of what I'm doing, whether it's when I'm working on the BBC, doing the radio, even going live with Jay on the Scotty and Motti podcast, but especially when you've got like a loud audience waiting for you to step out, and there's been other bands beforehand that have been on. And for me, I love it when you've got really good support acts, because if the support act before you has absolutely nailed it, you've got to go out and do better than them. And
Right.
I always think of it like boxing. That for me, it's like I've got to do better than that, and then really so that's where the energy comes from.
Right.
And usually within the first, like the set would have an instrumental track, and then they play that for 2 minutes, and I'd walk out, and depending on the response, that would sort of dictate how the rest of the night was going. And sometimes when I'm performing, it's a bit more. It's music, poetry, and it's also like a little bit of like comedy. The bits I enjoy the most is doing the crowd interaction, because wherever you go around the country and stuff, you never know who you're going to speak to, and I get quite political sometimes in there, depending where I am, and sometimes that can go either way. You know, you get stuff chucked at you on stage. But yeah, so I can never really sit still. When we're in the green room, I'm always sort of pacing the floor left, right, and centre, itching to get out. But it was when I first started, I used to like drink a lot more, and I had a couple of terrible gigs because I thought I had to really sort of drown the nerves. And when I found out I couldn't perform to the fullest, it was all right gig, but I just didn't. It could have been a lot better. Then it was just really learning how to channel them nerves and not see the nerves as being a negative thing, but really it's just your desire that you want to do the best in what you're going to perform.
How big was music? How big of a part of your life was music growing up? I just feel like, you're an artist in so many ways. Like you mentioned, you do radio, you do poetry, you do music, you do so many things in the art space that for me is amazing. But like, how big of an influence was that for you growing up?
There's been no bigger influence at all in my life than the music. I did a question on Twitter. I think you actually replied to it, John. When I said, what if you had to lose one, whether it was sex, football, or music? You can say your own answer, but I didn't actually share my answer. To be honest, it's probably football that'd fall by the wayside. But music for me was always first and foremost. If I leave my house and I haven't got my headphones with me, if I've lost them or whatever, I'm in a bad mood for the rest of the day. I'm always listening to music in the car, in the house, cleaning, walking, anywhere. There's always a soundtrack to whatever I'm doing, and sometimes it can dictate my mood, or sometimes it can pacify my mood. I mean, it does that with all people, but I've always had the desire since it was about 9 or 10. I know it sounds a bit cliche to say the Beatles, and obviously that wasn't my generation, but I remember sitting in my nana's house or my grandma's house, and there used to be a program on in Britain called The Chart Show, and they played music from like the 60s or whatever on there, and I said, who's that? And I remember the Beatles was the first sort of I Want to Hold Your Hand was the very first song that ever sort of resonated with me. And then from there it went from Liverpool to Long Beach, because then Snoop Dogg came out, and then it was just that Doggy Style album just completely blew my mind. I remember it getting bought for me for my 12th birthday off my auntie. My mum, do you know the album? Do you know the inlay of the Snoop Doggy Style album?
Yes.
So we're in this sort of like family restaurant. My auntie's not even opened up the inlay, just bought what her nephew wanted to be bought for his birthday. And then we're sat there, and my mum's opened up the inlay and goes, "What's all this G's and bitches and endo and all it?" And then she goes, "What is it?" So then I was forced to take it back and get like some compilation tape, which was terrible.
Oh no!
Yeah, the only rap track was "That's How I'm Living" by Ice-T, which is in one of his better ones. But yeah, my mum went absolute mad at me. And then Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style would go around and passed on mixed CDs at bootlegs in school, and that was always the sort of like gin and juice. You couldn't go around anyone's house or on the streets. Everyone was sort of playing in the cars, and that's when I really got heavy into. So it's always been lyrics for me, John. And this is why it sort of transcends from poetry to music, and why when I've done some music, it's never really stuck to a genre. I usually look at what genre suits the lyrics that I come up with, because some musicians will do the music first, then write lyrics. I'm very much the other way around. So when I started listening to Snoop Dogg and obviously Dr. Dre, and then NWA was a little bit before that, but they were talking about gang culture in South Central LA. But at the same time in Manchester, there was like especially where I was living alongside Lemmersham, there was a gang epidemic popping off then, exactly the same sort of time. And a lot of my friends were like, I've lost friends to drugs or to the gun or to prison and stuff. And so the stories, even though what are you 5,000 miles away between Manchester and the west coast of LA, them stories still resonated. And then from there, it was just hip hop. Hip hop for me has always been, I mean, drum and bass to an extent, because that felt a bit more British, but hip hop and and me have always sort of been in sync in terms of just the lyric writing and the storytelling. And then I got more into sort of backpacker hip hop, and I was more into Common Sense, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Tribe Called Quest, The Roots. So that's when I got to sort of about 18, 19. But I can dip into anything. It's like if the lyrics get me, then the music is secondary to me. But to answer your question, short way, it's imperative that I always have music to listen to.
I see. I mean, we could talk about music all day because for me, I can't live without music just as much as you. Like I think without music, like literally a part of me is missing. And that, you mentioned that bit about like walking out of the house without your headphones, feeling down. I share that sentiment wholeheartedly. I feel the exact same way. Before we move on to the next photo, I maybe wanted to ask you one last thing. Is there anything that, like, off the top of your head that like leaves a lasting impact in your memories as a performer so far?
Lasting impact.
Anything fun, anything crazy, something you could share, maybe?
Oh yeah, I remember we did a gig in London, and because I have a live band. I know some sort of some performers do backing tracks and stuff, but I play with a live band, and we had a drummer, Jim, and the electrics blew, and he was playing to a click track in his ear, and the electrics blew, and he literally set his ear on fire. And all the music went out except for my mic. So I thought the backing band were trying to play a trick on me to see if I could stay on beat. And I'm just rapping away in front. And then I turn around and his head's like this fucking smoke coming from his ear. And he was like, he's quite, I think he's like 6'4", Jim. But so he's just like, he's a sizable bloke. And he was just stuck there. And I went, "What's happened?" He goes, "I've been electrocuted."
Oh no!
Yeah. But like the band that I used to perform with, like Jim and Ian and stuff, because there was only a 3-piece drummer and bass player and stuff. It was fucking incredible. Yeah, just turn around and see his ears on fire.
Wow. That's crazy. Hey, we can sit here and talk about it all day, but we got to move on. I'm going to send you to this next picture. All right, Dave. So I had to pick between this one and a photo of you with your daughters.
Yeah.
But I decided to go with this one because I wanted to hear a little bit about more of your life growing up as a child. First of all, this sepia, this tint gives off this idea that you're very old. And I don't think you're that old.
I'm not old. It's just that some tea or coffee spilled on the photo, honestly.
All right, talk to me about this photo.
Okay, so obviously that's me. I think I'm maybe a couple of months old, and that's my dad, who was, I think he was 18 when he had me, and my mum was 16. So they're very young parents, wow. Still together to this day. 45 years later, I think. Yeah, so they've stayed together all since teenage sweethearts, and married and that. But this photo was always quite poignant to me because I don't know if it's obvious there, but for a large part of my life, I was sort of mocked because I've got black hair and my skin sort of changing between beige and olive. It's not white and it's not black. I mean, I'm quoting one of my songs or poems, but I mean, I think it's more apparent there in my dad that he's not a white man. You can go to the hair and the sort of, it's more Asian looking. But for the more up until I was about 16, I was always called like derogatory names if you were like Spanish or Jewish or Asian. It was like that. That was like, I was known as sort of that guy, but I never really fit into any box. But it transpired when I was about 16 that my dad's real dad wasn't his dad. You know what I mean? It wasn't the guy who raised my dad wasn't his real dad. So then it came out that that my family was actually Indian, Irish, and Italian. So I've got a real. I mean, I live in Manchester now, so it's known as the migrants' melting pot, and I couldn't be more representative of that. I'm a mongrel, John. I think it's made up of many things. But if I'd have known that when I was younger, then it would have been a little bit easier going through the sort of your teen years are difficult because everyone just points the finger at any sort of difference and stuff. And my hair's wet at the moment, but when it's dry, it's just like mad fro business. And so like we when we were younger, we used to play when the World Cup was on or any sort of international tournament. The bigger kids in the playground would turn around and sort of pick. You'd be whatever nationality, depending on where you look like you were from. And I was never England. I was never any African teams. I was never anywhere from the Far East. But like I was Peru, Mexico, Italy, Spain, India. Well, India against the World Cup. But you know what I mean? That was like all across the board. Like And because I never really knew where I sort of fit in, and even more so now, it's like I don't know what strand of identity I'm supposed to fall under. But so that's why this picture's like I love looking at it. I'm proud of my dad because there's many parents that I know. I know I've got many friends that sort of are former friends who sort of gave up. I had kids at a young age and sort of stepped away from it, and I think that's it's a terrible thing to do. And he was 16 when my mum did the right thing, stuck by her and stuff, and it might not have been easy, but it's great. And I think that him holding me up on the shoulders there, it's sort of been his MO for all his life, because I've got a younger brother and a younger sister, and he's always tried to put us up on a pedestal as much as he can, works his ass off and stuff. So that's the reason why I actually love the photo.
This is you sharing that story of you growing up, and of course, sharing the story about your parents. This is to me very heartwarming, of course, but very interesting as well, because here in New York, you mentioned Manchester is like the migrants' melting pot. That is New York City in the flesh. Us New York City folks, we talk about, especially in our borough of Queens, we talk about this being the world's borough. This is literally the melting pot of all the cultures. And people, I think, seem to forget that, this idea of racism, this idea of, like you mentioned, derogatory words that are being thrown at us. For somebody like yourself, you didn't even know at the time what was going on with respect to your actual cultural background. So I think this idea of hatred, some people seem to forget, is universal, and it's one of those things that is everywhere, not just in New York or parts where there are immigrants or migrants or things like that. So I think that's something that we all need to sort of make sure we don't forget. But moving on, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about something that I'm not sure if you're comfortable speaking with me, but you mentioned quite a lot about your use of drugs with Jay on Monty and Scotty, the podcast.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about when it first came into your life and sort of how it affected you during the time you were using them?
So I mean, the first drugs that I remember using was weed, probably, and this was before alcohol. And me and Jay spoke about this off camera a little bit. That I'm never really convinced that that weed's a gateway drug. So I did that wrong way around. Alcohol was the first thing I took, then it was weed. But I always think alcohol's the gateway drug to other things, because once you start getting drunk on the streets, and I'm not too sure what the culture was like for you growing up in New York, John, but everybody was doing was getting pissed and drunk, and then everyone just started smoking weed, and then from then on it was just I'm not too sure how much it affected my life, because you have no comparative state. Do you know what I mean? That you just are and I was always able to function whenever I was high. I always found it when I was high and I wasn't drinking at the same time, it was always relaxing. It was always quite sort of, as an artist, it allowed me to sort of open my mind to sort of, I don't know, trains of thought that I might not have done. But then there's other times where I've got absolutely wasted and fell asleep and not bothered going to school, or just lost jobs because I was that wrecked. But then it went on from there to taking ecstasy pills, or I think you call it Molly over there, or MDMA. I'm not too sure. I'm not too au fait of what they call it over in the States. But it was ease over here in Manchester.
Right.
I remember the first time I took one, but my friend spiked me. As a good friend would, that's the sort of company I was keeping. And it was at this huge event. It was a wedding, and my mum and dad were there, and a good friend of mine, Paddy, dropped a pill in my pint, but he didn't tell me. And I'm there in this wedding suit, and I'm like, turned around to him and said, I'm heating up here, man. I said, something's not right. And he's trying to keep a straight face, but he's giggling and laughing his ass off and that. And I turned, I went, you bastard. And and at the time in Manchester as well, ecstasy was getting a really bad name for because they were a really bad batch of pills, and they were getting mixed with all sorts. It wasn't, Manchester's had got like a reputation of having the glory years of pill use, but at the end of the 90s, because there was a lot of money to be made with them, everyone was looking for profit margins and was just making pills out of next to nothing. So there's a lot of people getting taken out of raves and warehouses and stuff. So when you drop one for the first time, my natural instinct was like, shit, I've seen everything in the papers. And my mum and dad were at the wedding. So my two things were to stay away from mum and dad and to stay alive. And it was just, so I was just raving like that. And then from there I took LSD. I've never gone down the road of opium or heroin or anything like that. I've taken cocaine in the past, but it's never really been it's not been a drug for me. I'm more sort of cerebral, so LSD would be, no. I like mind bending shit rather than like cocaine. I don't think people on cocaine are the best advert for cocaine, because I don't know if you've ever been, I don't think if you've ever been in company of anyone who's taken like coke, you don't want to. They don't look comfortable. They're talking at 100 miles an hour.
Right.
The tense, the grin in the jaws. Whereas if you see someone on ecstasy, you're like, he looks like he's in love with everybody. I understand. I understand the attractions for that. But if you're trying to sell coke, and this is your example of what coke does to you, it doesn't seem appealing. I mean, I've had some good nights, and I've not done drugs for a very long time. Right. But yeah, cocaine was never really for me. I think Jay will talk more openly about that drug. But for me, it was always LSD or weed and stuff like that. Magic mushrooms as well was always a good trip. Excuse the pun.
Oh, well, if there's one thing maybe we could wrap on is maybe asking about when you sort of had that wake up call, that realization. When was it like? Can you remember when you realized like, oh man, this is actually like affecting me in some way that I feel like maybe I should lay off of some of these things? Was there like a switch for you?
To be honest, it wasn't so much the drugs that I felt that I had to do as a switch. It was more the alcohol. And I still drink every now and then. But I think when I became a father at the age of 30, and that was a huge sort of turning point, because you're no longer responsible for just yourself. You've got other people that are relying on you and stuff. And then when you can't possibly function and go out on a 2-day bender and look after a baby and do nappies and stuff. So they were just incompatible, the lifestyles. So I think that was a huge turning point. And it just gets boring, you know. like I absolutely hammered it, John. Like I couldn't have done drinking, especially, but I did like some of the other stuff. I couldn't have done any more than I need. You know, I did it till it got boring. That's how many I did.
But that's not. But Dave, I think we need to put some respect in your name, and I think we need to give you some more credit, because I know I've been around many people who've used drugs recreationally, who've abused drugs. I think when they talk about trying to get off of it, it's such a difficult thing to do, and I know still people are still struggling. Maybe is there one thing that you can maybe share in terms of advice or something that you can maybe enlighten us with respect to how, because I know you mentioned that it was family and this idea of responsibility, but I think that switch is just, I think that takes a miracle.
Yeah, I don't think there's a one right answer per you know, one way of doing it. I think Jay talks about it a lot. I think everyone's got their own bottom and how they find themselves out of it. But I think people who've got a problem are aware they've got a problem, but it's the admittance to themselves which is harder. And by the time anyone's got a drug problem or a drink problem, the people around them will be aware of it as much as themselves. And I think it's the admittance that you've got a problem that sometimes people, because I think people realize that there might be a bit of they're embarrassed that they've got themselves into that state, and the worst thing that they can do is, rather than admit to it, they'll hide and just carry on drinking more. Do you know? And you know, it's a ridiculous state. And I've lost friends to. I lost a cousin a couple of years ago to alcohol abuse, and he had that was a huge thing actually. It was what was that, three years ago, and just before the pandemic, so 2019. And I remember visiting him in hospital, and just what alcohol had done to his body, and I just couldn't get. And he was 40, and he died not long after. But he came out and he told me like he was going to try all these different things, and then within 3 months he was dead. And I just can't get my head around it. When you've actually seen someone up close and personal, and sort of seeing the extent that what is a legal drug, which is advertised across every sports TV and stuff, you know, and I just to sort of see how much it had absolutely ruined him, because he's like, the skin was yellow, he was all bloated and stuff. And this was a bloke he's done like award-winning documentaries for the BBC, like on Bob Marley, on the punk movement and stuff like that. He's like produced and directed them. And then somehow alcohol, he would never, he always felt it was too weak. He saw it as a weakness to step forward. And I think the weakness is not to step forward. It's too easy to sort of rely on alcohol as a crutch. And I'm not saying that it's easy to get off it, but he got clean for like 9 months. And for some reason or another, the demons were too big. But I think just don't feel like there's any shame that comes with it, because it is an illness. And I think once you realise that, you wouldn't, if anyone had cancer, then you wouldn't hide it, would you? You know, and addiction is exactly the same sort of thing. It's just a different disease, and I think that anyone should sort of identify with that and not be ashamed or embarrassed that you need help and reach out for it, because there are organisations there, and I talk about this quite a lot with mental health as well. It's just from a male point of view, I don't know why we've got this idea that we have to be so-called brave or proper men or stuff like that. And you know, and it relates to addiction as well, because we don't. It's not a weakness. I think there's more strength in saying that you're struggling than there is hiding it. Personally, and I'm not saying that because I've done that in the past and I didn't find it easy. But I think more people do it. That's how you get clean, or that's how you get better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, I think it takes a lot of courage to do all these things, moving on and you coming to admit to terms with yourself, and then hitting bottom. And I think there's a lot of heart involved with things like that. So I just wanted to, I mean, maybe this is a little late, but I just want to congratulate you again, Dave, on all your successes in that way, because that's amazing to hear, for real. All right, Dave. So I selected this photo because it seems like you're part of a very large company of friends, and I love everything about this. I think the energy is amazing. It seems like they're having a good time. So talk to me a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so this was the very first music video that I shot for a song called Frank, and we hired out the local pub to shoot it. And instead of getting like extras in, I just asked all my mates would they fancy coming to the pub, and the landlord let us open the pub at 7 a.m. And then they basically put all the alcohol out, and then everyone was getting drunk from like 7 a.m. And it was an absolute chaotic day. But like a lot of my best friends are there, and it's just friendship's massive to me. You know, that like to be able to sort of lean on people, and a lot of stuff I've been going through recently, been able to sort of just dip into different, you know, perspectives and all that. And I'll never take for granted how many friends I've got. But that day was absolutely insane. It was just an absolute riot. The guy in the yellow coat there, he played the lead character in what was a short film called Frank. He was Frank. And then like the guy with the beard there, I went in and thought £100. I don't know what that is in American dollars. Roughly the same.
Around the same now because of the current situations, but yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that I'll get all my mates in. I'll put £100 behind the bar. That will be enough to sustain them having a few drinks, and that was gone within the hour. So yeah, and we were in there from 7 a.m. till I don't know, till 9, 10 at night. And then we just had the whole pub. But you can't really see them at the back. The tall guy at the back with the glasses, he was the cameraman and the working with the film crew to do it. But because my mates were getting more and more drunk and like having the time of their lives. Because everyone's like I never made any music. I never made any money from that music video or that single or anything. And it was all my money that sort of did the outlays, you know, for get the film crew, get the edit and stuff. And I look back, and some people might look back at that and say, well, that was a waste of money. But I see all them people now, and they still talk about that day, and that was worth every single penny. Do you know what I mean? That photo alone just sort of makes that for me. And I think sometimes we look at our investments. No, we look at what financial reward did it bring later on down the line, and that didn't. But I can't have the emotional investment that it brings back in it. No, not just to me, but to a lot of people that I love and think the world of. But yeah, it's such a brilliant day. And it's funny because everyone always gets shared again time and time again on social media. Everyone says, "Oh, remember this" and stuff. So it's gone down with a bit of name. And there's people like, "Why didn't you invite me?" And I fell out with a few people because I forgot to invite them.
I know, this is amazing because I also have a close group of friends, and I also share the sentiment in the sense that I rely on my friends a lot, and I love every single one of them. I think they are a very, 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 very big influence on my life. But is there any friends in particular that maybe helped you through dark times, are helping you through dark times, or celebrating your successes?
Well, if you look, the black man, Nathan.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like my oldest friend. So I've known Nathan for 30 plus years. So
Wow.
me and him have been. When I was talking about Snoop Doggy Dogg before, me and him like just gone through hip hop gigs galore throughout my life and went to high school together and stuff. I was the best man at his wedding. But yeah, I mean, I was out with him on Friday, and he's always been end of a phone any time of the day. We don't see each other for months because obviously we've both got kids and that now, and it's a bit more difficult. Right. He's always there for me, always throughout my life, as I likewise have for him. And when I was saying before that, when all the gang stuff was kicking off, where we were living in South Manchester, it was quite easy for us to get dragged into that sort of thing. And Nathan was very similar in the sense that friends between us that went to school with were getting shot, or like. I don't want to play how violent it was, John, because it was really bad. But that me and him managed to sort of get through, and he's got a really good career now and stuff, and I've got a good career, and it's like we're brothers as much as anything, And I know people use that term easily now, and we don't have the same parents or bloodline and stuff. But I'd die for him, and he'd die for me.
That's amazing. I want to ask you a little bit about. There's so many questions I want to ask, but before I have to let you go, I want to ask you a little bit about your art and the work that you do. I mean, we mentioned before you do all kinds of work across radio and spoken word, poetry, music, all these things. But if you had to pick one out of all of those things, not in terms of like consuming, but in terms of creating, which one would you pick and why?
Oof, that's a difficult one. I would probably say. Well, you didn't mention one there because I've just finished a book. Although you were asking about when it can come out, but in terms, I just love that's such a difficult question for me because I don't see myself as a poet. I don't see myself as a musician. I don't see myself as a radio presenter or a writer. I just see myself as a storyteller. Now, what I do is I pick the medium that I feel best to tell the story in. That's the way I sort of see it. I don't. If there's anything about me, John, if as soon as someone puts me in a box, I'm diving out of it. Do you know what? Like seriously, like I want to find someone else. The only box I want to belong in is when I'm dead and put 6 feet under. Up until that point, I want to be bouncing out of every box that people put me in. I just think life. There's too much variety out there in life, and like I said, I've just finished writing a book. I really enjoyed that, but. Next up, I'm going to be looking at film and plays and stuff like that. So I love creating. So I just love telling stories, John. That's all. That's it. That's what I love doing most.
Well, I guess so. I know there's 3 photos that we were supposed to talk to, but I wanted to surprise you with the last one, which was.
I hope it's the one I thought. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Is this one? Talk to me a little bit about this book because, of course, you've just finally sort of started talking about it in the public. I believe it's slated to release sometime soon. Here in the U.S., it's here in the U.S. It's a pretty late pre-order, so maybe you could talk to me a little about that later. But just overall, talk to me about this book.
Okay, so I was approached maybe 2 years ago by publishers after they'd heard me on a podcast talking about Manchester and growing up, very similar to what me and you have been doing now. And it just shows you don't know who's going to be listening to the podcast and the opportunities that are going to come from it. So somebody had heard me on a podcast talking about what Manchester was like when I was growing up. And then they approached me and the publisher said, would you be interested in writing a book, like a memoir? And I said, yes, I would like to. Yes, I would like to write a book. And then it went back and forth and we were looking at sort of how we were going to do it. Was it just going to be completely biographical? And I felt a little bit nervous with it doing that because there's been many books written about Manchester or certain periods about Manchester through the eyes of one person. And I never felt that gave the true story because how I see the city isn't the same as you. How I see United isn't the same as you see Man United, but we both love it. Right. So I thought, I've never written a book before. So typical David Scott, rather than do the easy thing, I thought, right, I'm going to try and get as many different voices to talk on a variety of different themes over a short space of time. So we chose the years 1996 with the IRA bomb to 2002, which was when I turned 21. So that was quite a formative period for me, but it also was a formative time for the city. Like if you look at musically with Oasis and stuff like that, but also there's a lot of music that doesn't get talked about in Manchester's history. Look at the football clubs. Man United were the best they've ever been in their entirety. During that period, Man City got relegated, but also came back up, and then that's when they moved to their new stadium. Culturally, the meet on TV, we had stuff like the Royal Family, Early Doors, Phoenix Nights, Cold Feet. So everything on TV was about Manchester. So the more I kept unpacking it, I kept thinking, why has nobody written a book about this? Because there's so much to tap into. Right. And then I started interviewing people with the idea that I knew what they were going to say. So like imagine like you've done tonight, you've teed up some questions thinking he might talk about this. But I interviewed 100 plus people for a book. And every single time I interviewed someone, it took me off on a different tangent. So I'm like, all right, well, I've got to explore that now, because a lot of people don't know that many black musicians that come from Manchester from the 90s, do they? But they existed, or female musicians, they existed. Everyone talks about Man United's class of 92, but nobody talks of Man City's class of 93. But the stories there, and this is what I was this was my point I was trying to say, is that I tried to get as many people's points of view, and then so it's like my life story for over a certain amount of time, or anecdotes really, but then it's interspersed with other people's takes on certain events as well. So together it's a collective rather than it sort of just being my story, and that's why it's Mancunians plural, not Mancunian.
Awesome. All right, before I let you go, one last thing. Is there anything, a short story that maybe you can share from the book that you can kind of give us a little bit of a tease?
You put me on the spot now. You could have queued me up. There's a great story about I'll not say the venue, but there's a great story about a well-known bar in Manchester that still exists to this day. So it's not the Hacienda. And it was during the time when all the gangs used to rush the doors. So they basically just charge in and then jump behind the counter and like basically take as much money as they could. But this bar had it was known and famed for not in a perverse way, but for having just a female only bar staff. Mm-hmm. And these were fucking hard as nails women that worked there. And the bouncer got wind that the local gangs were going to rush the door, and they had like 30 seconds to operate. But the thing is that they had like I think it was New Year's Eve, so they actually had a party going on in this venue whilst the gangsters were going to come and rush the door. So the bouncers told them to push everyone to the back of the club, and they had this big red curtain that sort of split the club. So they had that first half empty, and everyone dancing in the pitch black. Turn the music up as loud as possible. And then the bouncer said, as soon as the gangsters run in, I want you ladies to hide behind the bar. And then when they run in, you jump up, and anything you can pick up, just fucking chuck at these gangsters that are running in. You had like five. You had I think there was 5 or 6 women in the bar staff, one bouncer, and you had all these fucking hard nuts from Salford that were charging the door, and them just chucking bottles after bottle at them. And then the bouncers had like chairs trying to force them back out the door. Anyway, they shit themselves, so they retreated, and then they pulled the big curtain back. All the clubbers are still one end of the club, one end turning like, and nobody knew any different at all. And the night just went on, and that sort of resolve happens time and time again. There's a lot of stories like that within the book. But there's a lot of like celebrity names in there from Manchester history as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, Dave, that's fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on this book. Can you provide a little bit of like release details for the UK and the US?
So the UK, I know it's coming out on April the 18th. And then the American date, you actually showed me the American date that it's getting released, John. I think that's June, but I think that's down to the American publish, the arm of the American publishing. But I'll send you one before then anyway, no problem at all. But I'm thinking I'm coming over to the States to do a short book tour anyway. So
awesome.
Yeah, so you'll have to put me up.
Yes, sir. Of course. Hey, Dave, I just wanted to say one more time, thank you so much for coming on. But if there's anybody that's watching this video that has no idea who you are, where can they come find you?
Get me on social media. So on Twitter at arghkid, that's ARGH But John, man, it's a pleasure speaking to you again. We need to get you on Scotty and Motto.
Yes, sir. I think the last time I was on there, we were talking about the Trump election, and I think we were up till like 4 a.m.
Yeah. Jay still has a go at me now about that, because I pissed off to bed. I was like, I can't be doing this. that man's love of American politics, I just don't get it at all. I don't know, I'm so tired of it.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely get back on that podcast. But once again, Dave, thank you so much.
Yeah, you take care, John.